Jorgensen. I'm a graduate student at Fort Hays State University, and today we're going to talk about the science behind the new Jurassic World movie that came out June 12th. Today I am with Dr. Laura Wilson, Dr. Reese Barrick, and David Levering. So, I have a few questions for you. The first one I have is, are the dinosaurs depicted in Jurassic World an accurate depiction based on the understanding that we have from fossils? Am I going first?
Sure.
Oh, I think this is a good one for you.
Okay. I'm going to say yes and no and just cover all of my bases. No, in terms of, it depends on what you're talking about and how much in depth you're looking for. I mean, we have in the fossil record the bones, so the skeletal record. In terms of the basic shape and how we think these animals move, there are a lot of accuracies. You know, the really short arms on T-Rex and the long tail and the shape of the flippers on the Mosasaurus, things like that. So typical body or general body shape, yes. There were some artistic license taken with things like size. So Velociraptor is actually, you know, the size of what, a house cat, you know, or
medium-sized dog.
Medium-sized dog is pretty small. They pretty much invented Utah raptor in the way that it looks for the first movie, Jurassic Park in '93. Following that, there was actually a discovery of Utah raptor, which is a large 6-foot man-sized raptor. So it's not actually a velociraptor that's being depicted, even though that's what they call it. And then other things like colors, skin patterns. We know that there are going to be a lot of feathered dinosaurs that we didn't know about even 10 years ago. So Velociraptor, and some point during its life, would have been partially or completely feathered. And so in terms of body shape and movement of animals, yes, I think a lot of that is accurate in terms of size, proportion, and then feather scales, colors. I think there's a lot of artistic license taken with that.
Along those lines, can science tell us what colors and patterns dinosaurs had on their skin?
You want that one?
Sure. To a limited degree. So there are times where we'll find really well preserved fossils and sometimes fossils of feathers where we can see patterning on that feather, like black or white bars and things like that. More recently, there have been scientists who've been able to pull organic compounds out of the fossil feathers themselves and use that to get an idea of what color those feathers were when the animal was alive. So there are some things we can do to get an idea, but it's very limited at this point on really how much we can tell and the number of fossils that are preserved well enough for us to actually do it with. So yes, but not very much.
We still like allow a little artistic license because we're a long ways away from knowing the full pattern of colors that are available.
A lot of it can and will be based on what we see in animals alive today, and they're kind of two different evolutionary trains that diverge in terms of color. You have the camouflage, and then you have the bright color patterns, and we see both in different types of animals, mammals, birds, reptiles, whatever. And so within nature, we have the ability to take a lot of artistic license and still keep it within the realm of realistic animal patterning. So.
And if you look at some of the modern relations of dinosaurs, be it going backwards and kind of looking at alligators and crocodiles, or going to things like birds, you can get an idea of what some of those color patternings may have been. And a lot of that would have been dependent on like what Dr. Wilson was talking about with camouflage or display. But to go even further with that, you see birds today with things like structural color, where they have some iridescence and they're kind of shiny depending on how you're looking at them. And it's not unreasonable that you may have seen some dinosaurs with kind of display coloration along those lines as well.
Raptors are considered a very intelligent dinosaur. Given this, would they be able to be trained like we saw in Jurassic World?
Well, intelligence in an extinct animal is an interesting concept, and it's something that's very hard to measure. there's these things, these encephalization quotient, the EQ. So it's really looking at brain volume to body volume, brain size to body size. And things like the small maniraptorans and deinonychids and all those, the small raptor-like animals have a high EQ, so have a high brain to body ratio. And I think that's a lot where the initial idea of intelligence came from in these, some of these dinosaurs. There are other paleontological evidence for things like pack hunting a little bit, sites with more teeth than could come out of one jaw of a raptor-like dinosaur. Or there's the Montana multiple raptors in a prey item.
The pterosaurs? Yeah.
And so there's some scant paleontological evidence, but this whole pack hunting thing is not well supported by the paleontological record. And I think this whole intelligent and small dinosaurs is partially a product of Jurassic Park in itself. So I guess I don't even know what the initial intelligence of a dinosaur would be, so the trainability.
On the other hand, there have been studies where people have been able to train Komodo dragons, right? And trained to hit the black or the white ball in order to get a rat, and they actually learn some things faster than dogs do. So I think again, independent of whether they were really going to be able to be socially communicative as pack hunters and be trained as a group, likelihood is, they're animals and they had some intelligence, they were going to be able to be trained somehow. Just how highly they could be trained, how sophisticated their tricks could be, but they'd be able to be trained to do something anyway.
Yeah. Food rewards are a pretty strong motivator for
pretty much anything.
Yeah.
We can get our mud skippers to know, hey, there's people here. Let's go over and see if they're going to feed us.
And then they just appointed to swim back to their rocks once they realize it's not feeding time.
Would the dinosaur and human interactions seen in Jurassic World, for example, the gyrospheres and the kayaking, would that be safe for the tourist interactions, and would you recommend that for the park?
I mean, it's obvious that the lawyer got eaten in the first movie and they never replaced them, because I'm not really sure how you would get the liability insurance for something like that. Predators aren't the only things that kill other animals. We have a lot of evidence of herbivores, so things that are typically seen as docile, seen as big and lumbering, that can be very aggressive, especially when you're dealing with babies. Tramplings by elephants all the time. Hippos is responsible for a huge number of human deaths per year, and these are all things that eat grasses. So ultimately, no, it's a very unsafe thing to do because these are wild animals and they're completely unpredictable. The same way, if you're going on safari in Africa or you're driving through Yellowstone, it's not a good idea to get outside of your car, even if you're talking about giraffes and elephants or bison or something like that.
But how cool, to feel like a little mouse in your little ball and you can rotate it around. It'd be fun. But yeah, it's, in some senses, I think it would be kind of cool. I'm not sure whether, if you had the appropriate sort of glass like the gyrospheres had, I think it would be pretty tough to actually crunch through that. I think it would break a lot of teeth off before you'd be able to break that. But ultimately, you have to sort of, it's a movie, so they get to play in the future to pick and choose what they think is safe to go cruising through. A dinosaur, I think the basic thing is dinosaurs have never seen people, and people haven't seen dinosaurs. Who knows what's safe?
But I do question the sending two teenagers and one alone and not having like autopilot on it, just having the announcement, please return back. and having no way of actually making that gyrosphere go back to the beginning of the ride.
Because what you saw in the movie, when they said, go back, no, we're going to go further, is exactly what would happen in real life.
Yeah.
Not even just like teenagers, but anyone.
Any of the three of us.
They're like, please bring your gyrosphere back. We're like, no.
Maybe later.
Yeah. That being said, when they had the shot of the visitors kayaking down the river, I mean, I leaned over to my husband. I was like, I would totally do that. It was really cool.
You just have to have some, I think all of that, just have to sign a lot more waivers to
Yeah.
let people go through.
Kayaking, and then the angry Triceratops appears.
His horns are pointy.
Yeah. Well, you're not, maybe that's why they're not in rafts or in kayaks instead.
That's true.
So moving on to the marine reptiles, can a mosasaur get to be that large?
That's pretty large. I think they took, Mosasaurus could get, Mosasaurus and Tylosaurus were the two largest, I guess they're basically the largest of the mosasaurs. And I think they scaled him up a little bit. It's a little bit of the velociraptor getting to Utah raptor size. They get to be very large, but I think they scaled him up just a little bit because, to be the hero, they got to be big enough to essentially take down not just kill a T-Rex, but be able to practically swallow it in a gulp, and that's pretty big.
So we don't have any evidence that we had any mosasaurs that big. Could they get that big? We don't know that they did, so I don't know if that answers that question. With them, we also don't understand exactly the metabolism of them, and that's going to control absolute size in a lot of ways. So whether physiologically they could get that big is something I don't think we can answer at this point. We have no fossil evidence for it.
Another consideration there, when like comparing what we have fossil evidence for versus what they portrayed in Jurassic World, is that they made a big emphasis throughout that movie of like bigger is better as far as attracting visitors to this park. It's very possible that they had your standard Mosasaurus genome ready to go, and they're like, 30 feet, let's bump it up a little bit. They clearly demonstrated ability to bolster size in these animals in other cases. And it's entirely possible that what you saw was a good representation of a mosasaur, and they just jacked the size up a little bit, a lot of it, possibly.
I mean, I think it's important to note there's a lot of, criticism going around about the science of the movie, independent of the fact that it was a great movie and it was very entertaining and, kind of the great monster flick. They had a very important line in the first half of the movie of saying that these are genetically modified, that they are not going to look like what they would in the Mesozoic. And so right there, they rewrite the book of being able to, take feathers off of dinosaurs and being able to scale up the size types of things. So within the realm of Jurassic World, of the canon, if you will, of that series, they gave themselves the ability to make dinosaurs look like what they wanted to, or marine reptiles look like what they wanted to. So people could argue that it's not important that we don't have the fossil evidence because these are living animals and these are not representative of anything extinct that we know about.
When the mosasaur lifts up to eat the great white shark, you can see that it has a second set of teeth inside its mouth. Do they actually have that in the fossil record?
Mosasaurs do have pterygoid teeth, and it's one of the cool things that we still don't know a lot about mosasaurs is exactly what they're related to. Are they related more to snakes, which also have pterygoid teeth? It's one of the things that sort of ties them to snakes. Or are they more closely related to monitor lizards, like Komodo dragons? So there's evidence going both directions. So they're closely related probably to both snakes and monitor lizards, but many mosasaurs, I guess pretty much all mosasaurs have a second set of pterygoid teeth right down the middle of their mouth.
So so kind of on the palate, like you see. Yep.
Can and would pterosaurs lift people up into the air like it did with the assistant?
Would it? No. Could it? No. They're not. They're not that sturdily built, in the way their feet probably couldn't even grasp onto.
No, they're flat-footed.
Very flat-footed.
I mean, those guys were like the giant eagles in Lord of the Rings, where they can come down and pick up humans. And based on the morphology and the bone structure of pterosaur feet, they didn't have the big grasping talons like we see on birds of prey, which is very much how they were depicted in those scenes. And then, as Reese said, they didn't have the power. I mean, these are things that are big and that can fly. And as we know from birds, that they're very fragile when they do that. And they have to stay very light to stay in the air. And that's not only in the bone structure, but that's in the muscle structure as well. And so they would not have had the ability to lift something that weighed more than they did and then carry it off.
So something that should maybe be established as far as how we know these things about pterosaurs is we can look at the bones of modern animals, if we all get a skeleton, and more importantly in this case fossil animals, and get an idea of how strong particular muscles were. We can look for growth marks on those bones that tell us how much strength they may have had in a particular area. Based on what we know about pterosaurs, the amount of power they would need to flap and get a full-grown adult up in the air, they didn't have that kind of musculature. They weren't anywhere near strong enough in order to do that, let alone any of the other tricks that you saw them doing in the movie. And the same thing with the claws, that they had grasping talons on their feet. Not only would we find the talons, we would find evidence of really strong muscles in the hind limb to support like being able to latch on to something. And we don't really have that.
And the fact that most of our pterosaur fossils come from, or a lot of them come from, things like shallow marine environments, and we're probably eating fish. So I'm not sure how many of them would be hunting on land for things, twice their body mass.
That's right. Most of them were the big pteranodons they had, mostly probably fish eaters, and so they weren't going to be chasing things on land. And they had some little dimorphodon with the teeth and the little sort of tyrannosaur-looking heads flying around, but a lot of the smaller ones were probably eating insects and things. So,
or small mammals,
or very
at the most,
small mammals,
rodent type things.
So the attacking humans everywhere was another bit of
dramatic effect.
Yeah. It wouldn't have been nearly as interesting if they had gotten out and just blown away. Out
and
to
maybe
the ocean.
snapping at some insects.
Yeah.
Helping the mosquito problem.
Cut away to the Dimorphodon going after a dragonfly, and then back to people running and screaming.
Yeah.
So the entire premise of Jurassic World and the previous movies is built on the fact that scientists were able to extract fossil DNA. Is this possible for scientists?
well,
we haven't done it yet for DNA.
And part of it too is I think it's, can you get it from a fossil? Well, fossils can go from things that are a few thousand years old. And so I think you get a frozen mammoth, you can get DNA from it, and we would call that a fossil. But as far as getting back to extracting DNA from things that are 80 million years old, never say never, but it's not been done yet, and it's pretty highly unlikely.
We've sequenced what's been interpreted as proteins from dinosaur bone. We do have evidence of soft tissue, things that we never expected to be found in 67 million year old fossils. There's an article just the other day about red blood cells and blood coming out of dinosaur bones. And so our knowledge of what gets preserved and how and what to even look for or what to expect in really old fossils is definitely changing. But in terms of what's done yet, no, there's been no DNA of dinosaur aged fossils or older. But Never say never.
Never say never.
One of the difficulties with that is, in the movie they kind of say like, well, there were holes, we put frog DNA in there, and the only problem was that they could change sex. And that requires such an advanced knowledge of the mechanics of DNA that performing a trick like that where the only thing that was even accidentally modified was their ability to alter what sex they are during their lifetime would be not super likely, tenuous at best. Even if we did get 60% of a true dinosaur genome, that'd be awesome. That'd be amazing for paleontologists and for science, but still nowhere near enough to actually make a true to form like T-Rex or something like that.
And based on that, should scientists try to de-extinct animals, like attempting to de-extinct the woolly mammoth that has been seen in news the past few years?
Heck yes. It becomes philosophical questions, but the reality is, if we can do it, we will, because that's human nature. I mean,
Scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
They should, and that's still true. And I think we'd still do that. I think it's we're too fascinated with the possibilities, and paleontologists would think it would be really cool, but the people that are able to do the genetics are going to say, if I can do this, I have to try it. We're curious, and we always want to see what we can do, and so there's always a little philosophical differences, but whether you think we should or not, if we can, we will.
What was the other line from Jurassic Park? How can we stand in letting discovery and not act? The other end of that
exactly
philosophy.
And who knows? When you're bringing back an extinct animal, it's got to be alive in a whole new, different environment, and whether they would survive is a whole other question. But who wouldn't want to see a woolly mammoth?
Or ride one.
Or ride one.
Or kayak next to one.
Sure. I think that Reese brings up some really good points as far as how human beings operate and progress and drive for discovery. My personal fear behind de-extinction is that it's kind of lazy conservation when you're talking about trying to conserve modern species that are under threat of extinction, and getting this mindset like, well, if we wipe out their habitat and they go extinct, we'll just collect a few specimens, we'll save their DNA, and we will resurrect them in a zoo, and then they won't be extinct, and we can pat ourselves on the back for not having wiped out an organism, which kind of defeats the entire point of, well, right, but you did make it go extinct, and now its original habitat and all the associated organisms that it was living with are gone. So I think that there's a danger in people thinking that we can put a Band-Aid on damage that we're doing to the environment just by de-extincting really the flashy things like tigers and pandas and elephants today, or woolly mammoths from the past, because those are such a small fraction of the biodiversity that you're dealing with when you talk about clear-cutting rainforest or wiping out a coral reef.
And I think the reality is even if you can recreate an extinct animal, you're not truly de-extincting them, because you're not going to get a viable population of them, because if you can bring back one or two, it's still something that's going to live a few years in a park. You're not going to have a viable population with a viable amount of genetic diversity to actually create the ability to have a functioning, reproducing population that's going to be able to function as the species that it was when it was originally around. So, recreating one or two or a few is not really truly bringing them back and de-extincting them and putting them back in the wild, back out into nature.
Yeah. Don't really have anything to add. I think they nailed it, and again, to kind of skirt around the ethical, philosophical issues. we're scientists, and it's in our nature and our profession to question and to test and to experiment and to push the boundaries and push the envelope. And given the tools and given the methods, if we can, we're going to try. And the scientist in me is really excited about that. So, just to see what we can do.
So thank you so much for our panel for joining us and answering our questions. And thank you for joining the Sternberg Museum today. And that's all we have.
Bye.
Go out and enjoy Jurassic World.